Hi, I'm Fred Joyal, and this is the Superbold podcast. I have a really fascinating guest. It's something that I'm extremely interested in. And I'm always bringing on people who make bold moves in their life, especially if they're trying to solve big problems. And this is a big problem that my guest, Josh Marsh, is solving or is attempting to solve. We'll say he's on the trajectory to solve. It's SciFi Foods, and it's a great name, and I think it's probably appropriate. And we're going to dig into how he came up with the name and what he does. Josh, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Fred. It's really great to be here.
And so Josh Marsh is solving this problem. Meat, if I
pretty
saw
much
it in one word.
Yeah.
Right. So what is SciFi Foods?
Yeah. So we are working on creating real meat without the need for animals. We're growing real meat from cells instead of animals. I'm a meat eater. I'm generally pretty pro meat as a food. Love a good burger. Actually pretty carnivorous. But demand for meat has grown dramatically for the last 100 years and is on a rapid growth trajectory for the next 30 plus years as the world population is getting wealthier and demanding to eat more and more meat. And unfortunately, the world really can't sustain that kind of demand, and it certainly can't do it sustainably. Right? Meat's already one of the biggest contributors to climate change. Beef in particular is one of the worst culprits. About 80% of deforestation of the Amazon is related to the cattle industry, right, in some way. Right? So it's already a big problem, and climate change is decreasing arable land. So we have kind of demand for meat going up and to the right, while our ability to supply it is going down, and we need to figure out a better way of doing it. And cultivated meat really is the answer. Plant-based meat's a good step in the right direction, but people want to eat real meat. And so at SciFi Foods, we're figuring out how to create real meat and just do it in a better way.
And so I want to touch back on several of those points, but so a lot of what happens as a country in the developing countries, as they emerge, the appetite for meat tends to increase. And so around the world, most countries are moving from third world to first world as much as they can, or at least several of the classes in those countries are doing that. And so statistically, the demand for meat and beef in particular, but I mean, the animal production in this country is mind-boggling. The number of chickens that we slaughter per day is kind of staggering.
Yes, in the billions.
Yeah, it's just like that's a lot of feathers, just to get rid of. But the other thing is that the effect on the environment, as you're saying, it's the impact is going up because the demand is going up, and one of the things that is really tragic is that the demand in South America, Brazil in particular, isn't it? They've become very comfortable chopping down wide swaths of the rainforest to raise more cattle, which is not what the land was made for. And so we're strangling the planet a little bit here to just to have ribeyes.
100%. And love a good ribeye, right? But is it worth cutting down the rainforest and throwing billions of animals into factory farming? And the reality is, intellectually, no. Emotionally, though, eating food is an emotional decision, and people don't think about what's the best decision for the world in 15 years when I'm ordering this steak in a restaurant, right? They think about, I want this juicy ribeye. And so ultimately, you can't really shift people's behavior away from eating what they want to eat. We just need to figure out a better way of creating what people do want. And that's exactly what we're doing here at SciFi Foods.
I don't think the vegan movement has a lot of propulsion right now.
No. No.
And you know, the amazing thing about the food industry is we've created a total disconnect from the animal that provides the protein and the experience of consuming that. You know, we don't think about how a pig is raised or how a chicken is raised or what we feed a cow. You know,
not at all. Yeah, people, have the kind of pastoral ideal in their mind. They like to think of cows living happily in the field. The reality in the US is like 95% plus of all meat is factory farmed.
Yeah.
70% plus of all cattle, right? That's what people don't really want to think about, and no one likes that reality, right? People don't like that reality from an animal welfare perspective. It's not good from a farmer perspective. The only people it benefits is a small number of meat processors. So we really need to move to a better system.
Yeah. So we need tasty protein, and that's what you're working on.
Yeah, exactly.
So how the heck are you doing that?
Yeah, so we are growing real meat, starting with beef, and we're doing it from animal cells. So we've literally taken cells from a cow, and we're using cutting edge advances in synthetic biology and tools like CRISPR and things like that to then optimize that cow cell so that we can grow it in big steel tanks called bioreactors. And that allows us to grow that and create actual real beef, but just growing it in a process that looks kind of similar to like a fermentation, right? Similar to like beer or wine, big steel tanks, apart from instead of growing yeast that are making wine or beer, we're growing actual cow cells that we can then eat at the end of the day. And ultimately, that's a much, much more efficient process, right? You don't have to raise a whole animal. We can just work on the actual bit of the cow that you want to eat and grow that. With a much tinier land footprint, water footprint, energy footprint, none of the deforestation, none of the methane emissions, but still actual tasty beef at the end of it.
It seems like, and can be done anywhere on the planet, basically. Let's eliminate Antarctica as the ideal place, but they could even have their own little beef factory down there if they wanted to.
Eventually, yeah. Now, and I'm making it sound easy, right? There are some real technological challenges to getting that to work and to do it scalably and affordably, right? Because the products in the end have got to be affordable. And that's where really the kind of advances that the technological advances that we focused on are making it possible.
And are you getting there with the technology? I know that's one of the biggest problems is it can be done, but you've got like a $40 pound of hamburger or something like that. And
yeah, so we feel very confident. So our very first products will be a blend which combine plant-based ingredients with cultivated beef. There's lots of reasons for that, but it does reduce the cost and reduce the capex involved. And we feel very confident that with our approach, with that blended approach and our technological approach, that we'll be able to create burgers for like $1 a burger at commercial scale. So we're actually building our pilot plant right now. We'll have that pilot plant operational this year. We expect to be completing our submission to the FDA this year as well. And hopefully we'll be in a position where we're allowed to start selling our first burgers end of next year. They'll still be, at that point, a premium product. But the goal is to move as quickly as possible to build a large-scale commercial facility and get the price down to that, the cost down to that $1 a burger price point.
Yeah, it's like anything that, the first wave of it's really expensive, but if it becomes successful, you just change the scale and it keeps driving the price down. I mean, this is an amazing thing that I think you're doing because it's solving an enormous problem. It's solving a couple of enormous problems, trying to protect the atmosphere and preserve some of the rainforest that we absolutely need, but also feed the world, get dense protein out to people in a way that doesn't impact the planet.
Yeah, it's how can we get the foods people want to eat, right? And actually not just replicas, but actually real versions of that food without any of the problems, right? And ultimately, I don't think you can persuade people to eat something by moralizing at them, right? So yes, we're doing this, large part because of the environmental issues and because of the animal welfare issues. But ultimately, we just want to make a really great tasting product that's affordable and that's fun and exciting for people to eat. And for me, it's really cool that we're figuring out how to create meat in this new way. And that's just something that I think we can get excited about.
So what made you choose this? What triggered this for you?
Well, it's something I've been dreaming about for a very long time. I read the book The Singularity is Near by Ray Kurzweil 15 plus years ago, in my early 20s. And that was the book that really made me realize that exponential improvements in technology would really dramatically change the world in our lifetime. And it made me realize that there was many kind of sci-fi type ideas that could become a reality in the near future. And I was always a big sci-fi fan and had read a science fiction book shortly after that called Player of Games by Ian Banks. And in this book, he wrote about the fact in this futuristic society, he wrote that they were cultivating their meat in tanks instead of growing in animals. And it just really struck me. It was like a light bulb went off in my brain that I was like, that has to be the future. As I'm thinking about this kind of utopian future that we're trying to use technology to build as humanity, then if that future, if in that future we've cut down the whole rainforest and with just having billions and billions of animals in brutal factory farming conditions, that doesn't really seem like the utopia we want to be living in. And so how can we do something different? And to me, again, as a meat eater, it always felt obvious that cultivated meat would be that answer, right? If we can figure out how to grow real meat and just do it in a better way without the need for animals, without the need for all those problems, but still have it to be real meat, that just felt clear that had to be the ultimate solution. And it just became really an obsession of mine.
Well, it's fascinating how sci-fi writers are so capable of coming up with these things, whether it's, Gene Roddenberry coming up with essentially the flip phone and things like that, and dozens of other things, to, Arthur Clarke conceiving of a geosynchronous satellite. But somebody goes, oh yeah, we can do that. And to this, where you're doing exactly what was in the book. So this is the SciFi Foods is, food inspired by sci-fi. I get it.
100%.
So let's talk about your background. I'm very pleased that you are striving for such impact in the world, and why is impact so important to you, if you know?
Why is impact so important to me? Honestly, ever since I was a kid, when I kind of looked out into the world and felt like the world just seemed like an unfair place, and I felt like a strong desire to try and make it better. And as a kind of early teen, it felt clear to me that politics would be the route to do that, and that I should go into politics and try and make the world a better place. And then, by my early 20s, I kind of realized that it's really hard to make a positive impact in politics, but had got incredibly excited by the potential for technology to make the world a better place, in all kinds of ways. And that's always just been a kind of core driving factor for me. And certainly as I've got older and just realized how the world was going in really such a bad direction from a climate change perspective. I began to feel in recent years that if I could be doing anything that could have a big impact on the climate, I felt almost a moral obligation to try. And I've always felt like it's easier to change technology than change people. And that, again, better way to do that, rather than trying to moralize at people and tell them to change, is figure out how we can use technology to give people what they want while making the world a better place. So it's always been a big driver.
Well, I often reflect on the fact that, at the turn of the 20th century in the, 1900, the biggest urban problem they had was horse manure everywhere.
Yeah.
There were mountains of it filled with flies and rats and everything, all in every major city in the world, because they used horses for transportation. And they even talk about like a horse would die and the owner would leave it in the street, and the city would have to go drag the horse out of the street and stuff. And they had an international symposium on how to solve the horse shit problem. And in Paris, and after 3 days, they disbanded because nobody had any solutions whatsoever. It's like put it on barges and take it out to sea is like that's like a Sisyphean task almost. And then all of a sudden, cars come along, and the problem just goes. Technology makes the problem go away in within a decade. And it's phenomenal to think about. And I want to go back. You mentioned Ray Kurzweil, and he talks about the singularity, which he believes is it's essentially when computers are self-governing and they are no longer controllable. And the date he threw out is 2045. I'm hearing people talking about moving that back to 10 years to like 2035, just because of how fast AI is going. Nobody imagined that it would accelerate the way it's been going in 2023. And so I think we'll look back at this year and say, this is the year everything changed. And I could be off by a year, but it's been phenomenal. So where did you grow up?
I grew up in a small town in England called Malvern in Worcestershire, a couple hours west of London.
Oh, okay. And were your parents a big influence on this solving the world's problems attitude you developed?
Certainly my dad was always a big science fiction fan as well, and that probably inspired some of my original thinking. But otherwise not too much.
But you live stateside now. You living in San Francisco?
Yeah, in San Francisco. So I lived in London for a while, then moved to New York, lived in New York for 8 years, and then moved to the Bay Area actually to launch SciFi Foods, really because we felt that it was just the best place to launch the company in terms of the talent, the capital, lab space, all the things we needed to make happen to make SciFi Foods possible.
I mean, that's exciting. And so you had to raise quite a bit of money. This is not like writing some software. This is
definitely not. Yeah,
very, very hardware based, certainly, and with a lot of hard tech and a lot of brain power. And as you say, it's laboratories. It's all sorts of equipment that you're figuring out. Is there a software technology aspect to what you're doing that propels this, or is it just like laboratory stuff that primarily that helps you to develop this stuff?
Yeah, so it is heavy biotech. Ultimately, our key from a technological perspective, how do we make an affordable product, right? Because at the end of the day, what you want is a burger that tastes great and is affordable, and all kinds of other meat products. But as you backtrack, what goes into that? And ultimately, it's all about how much does it cost to grow your animal cells, right? And if you take the typical cost of what's called cell culture, which they've been growing animal cells in biopharma for a long time. But if you just take the typical cost of that, it's really prohibitively expensive. What we've done is take a technological approach. We built what's called a kind of synthetic biology platform that uses all of the latest advancements, tools like CRISPR, with data science, with lab automation, that allows us to really quickly experiment with hundreds of different tiny variations to our cells. We use CRISPR and make tiny changes to the cell, and we use this equipment to test things in high throughput and experiment and find what actually works as we're optimizing our cell lines so that we can grow them affordably in big steel tanks in bioreactors. And that approach and that technological platform has allowed us to run very, very quickly. It's pushed us further than anyone else in the world when it comes to cultivated beef. And it's what has allowed us to get to the point now where we're building our pilot plant and getting ready to commercialize. So we do use data science and lab automation, and we have some really interesting robotics that allows our things to move in high throughput. But ultimately, it's all kind of biotech in the lab.
Now, the other thing that I want to know, are you going to be able to put flavorings in the beef? Like, are you going to be able to pour some beer into the vat, or maybe some Worcestershire sauce or steak sauce or something like that?
You wouldn't do it. You wouldn't do it in the bioreactor, but after, when you're mixing it into a burger, for sure, it'll be a ground beef, and you can mix whatever you want into it.
Yeah. Okay. I like to, solve the problem as early as possible, but there was something else that I wanted to talk about how much funding this required, because I think a lot of people say this is a pretty serious pitch to get people to invest in. I know that some people believe in it. I mean, did you find a private equity firm or a venture firm that was also passionate about the problem you're solving? Or did they just believe in you because you were so persuasive?
We're very lucky to be supported by a bunch of amazing investors. A16Z, the bio fund of A16Z is our lead, has been our biggest lead investor, and it's been a really great supporter. A16Z is one of the most well-known and best regarded, most highly regarded venture funds in the Valley. And they have a bio fund specifically focused on biotech. So they're one of the few big VC funds that could really get excited and be able to diligence both from a kind of scientific and biotech perspective, and the kind of fact that we're doing a consumer food brand at the end of the day. So they've been a great partner to work with. But we also have a ton of other amazing angels and smaller investors who've been incredibly supportive. So, I think it's one of the great things about doing something that is so bold and that can have such a big impact on the world is like, yes, it is hard. Yes, it takes a lot of money, but the impact can be massive. And the value creation, if we're successful, is also massive. And people get excited by those kinds of ideas, right? So it's been amazing for me doing this company and just seeing, the incredible supporters, the incredible investors, the incredible employees that we can get because of the boldness of the mission, in a way that certainly was harder in other previous companies I did that weren't quite as bold.
Okay, so what else you've been an entrepreneur before this? You've tried a few other things, I imagine.
I've really been an entrepreneur now for my whole career, but I was primarily doing software. When I came out of college, I was really excited about all the things that were happening in social media. There's a whole backstory about a company I tried at college that had failed, but I came out of college, excited about the power of social media for businesses to connect with customers, and ended up founding one of the world's first ever Facebook app development agencies that was helping brands build apps on Facebook. Built that to a profitable small agency and sold it. But before we did, was really interested in the power of social media as a customer service tool, and thought it was a really powerful way for consumers to get help from companies, and built a software platform called Conversocial that helped big brands deliver customer service over social media. And that evolved into messaging and bots and AI before the end. And that ended up being a venture-backed company that I ran for about 8-9 years after we spun it out of the agency. And that was eventually acquired by a bigger software company as well. Had been thinking about cultivated meat throughout that whole time, but had been pretty busy on the journey of building those companies.
Yeah. Well, my experience in starting a few businesses, smaller ones along the way, before I launched my business, which became a success, is everything informs you. You don't imagine it will, but you look back and say, yeah, had I not tried that or gone in that direction or used that technology or found these people, I wouldn't know what to do now. So it's great to be to have been out there doing all sorts of things. Is there a specific mentor in your life that you could point to that influenced you heavily?
I feel like when it comes to mentors, there's never really like one person, or for me, there's never one person. But there's been lots of different people that have helped me and provided advice. And often, you find people who are really useful in one particular area. My chairman at my previous company, Mike Hedger, certainly taught me a lot about how to work with investors and work with boards. And I have a number of great friends who are successful entrepreneurs and investors, and have taught me a tremendous amount along the way. So I feel like, part of the job of the founder is just to constantly be learning, and you're often constantly trying to reach out to the smartest people on any one particular topic and triangulating advice. And ultimately, everyone has their own perspective, everyone has their point of view. You can often go and ask two equally smart and successful people about the same problem, and they'll tell you two completely different things, right? So you've always got to make your own decision, but you want to kind of sense check stuff with the smartest people as much as you can.
But I love that phrase that you just coined, triangulating advice, because there is so much of that. Is you have to say this person, and you're sort of feeding in what's their bias or what's their focus versus another person's, and then you say, it's some amalgam of those two opinions that I have to work with. And that's how you end up inventing your own pathway.
Exactly.
And as you said, great. If you're lucky, you have a whole slew of mentors.
Yeah.
And some of them just said one thing to you: don't do that. Right? Yeah. Don't try that. That won't work.
And that's often the advice that's best to get.
Yeah. And they save you from driving off a cliff. And then there's other people that like you can reflect with on a regular basis and say, I'm faced with this, and this. What would you tell me? And they have so much experience that they say, I know it feels like that, but it's not really as bad as you think. I mean, I'm actually an entrepreneur again. I'm running another business now in the marketing world, and it's so different now because when things go wrong, I'm expecting them to, and I don't panic. I just say, well, I'm going to go to sleep and wake up tomorrow and solve it. And figure out what information is the marketplace telling me, or what do I have to do with the product? I don't think, it's over, we're doomed. And also to know sometimes the market's not ready, or the market doesn't care. I think you're at a point now also in history, and I want to ask you if you think this is true. Are you ahead of the curve, or are you riding a wave that is actually already starting to build?
Well, it depends which curve you're talking about, right? I mean, I think there is
the appetite, the literal and figurative appetite for meat that has been made in a vat.
I mean, look, ultimately, there are no cultivated meat products on market in any real way, certainly not in the US. That will be changing. We think we'll be the first to bring cultivated beef to the market in the US and possibly the world. And I think, until those products are in the market, it's really impossible to understand the consumer wave or consumer sentiment around it. So I think we're even pre-wave right now,
Okay.
And I think part of our job is going to be building that wave. Partly we're piggybacking a little bit off the kind of, the meat alternative wave in general, right? And the plant-based meat world is kind of going through the hype cycle at the moment. It got hyped, and now it's in the kind of trough of disillusionment, and now starting to go. And I think there'll be a separate kind of wave coming for cultivated meat.
Yeah, and I think that wave that they created, that interest showed that it's there, but they didn't necessarily solve it. And then there's,
I mean, that's what was very clear from that whole experience, right? And it was quite fascinating to watch the kind of tremendous growth of plant-based meat from basically nothing to like a multi-billion-dollar industry in the US. But then the growth kind of flattened off. It's still multi-billion-dollars of sales, but it's not growing in the same way it was. And why is that? Well, when you look at the data, it's pretty clear. Tons of people tried plant-based meat, right? There was tons of interest, but most people haven't continued to buy it. Right? The repeat purchase rate is really bad. And when you ask people why, like almost 90% of them say it just doesn't taste good enough. Right? People aren't willing to pay more for a product that tastes worse. And but
pretty easy conclusion, actually.
yeah, but the kind of core big secular trends are there, right? If you look at over 50% now of Americans under 40 consider themselves flexitarian, right? People are increasingly aware of like the challenges with conventional meat. They don't want to give it up, but they do want to make different choices and better choices, right? And it's just the problem is there, and it's just the solutions that exist today just aren't good enough. And that's really what we're doing, is bringing a better solution.
Yeah, I mean, I'm personally, I'm always eating only if I'm going to eat beef, it's going to be grass fed. And so, free range chickens and things like that. That is a very heavy direction people are going in, and you'll see it supported by the grocers. That's really the thing. And of course, if you're looking at plant-based foods and meat versus regular meat, you go to the butcher section, it's gigantic, and then there's a small refrigerated section with the plant-based alternative. So there's the appetite for the real protein of every kind is still much more satisfying, and of course what we're used to. I mean, 100 years from now, maybe people won't even remember what a real chicken tastes like, so it won't matter. But it sure matters now. So I admire what you're doing, and that you've got some momentum here, and I wish you tremendous success. And everyone out there, this will be available at your local grocer very soon. Very soon. I can feel. So keep your eye out for some SciFi Foods. So Josh, I love to ask this. Is there anything you would have not done in your past that you look back and say, yeah, that was really the wrong move or the wrong direction?
My previous company, Conversocial, which I ran for 8-9 years, and it was venture backed, and we had an okay exit, to a bigger company, which was a good outcome, but it wasn't the kind of $1 billion world-changing outcome that I kind of dreamed of when starting the company. And ultimately, I've thought a lot about what were the strategic choices that we made. And in the end, I think the kind of foundational sin, as it were, was me just being way too tied to my initial vision, and not being market driven enough. I had a kind of really strong thesis for where I thought the world would go, and that kind of blinded me a little bit to bigger opportunities that were standing there right in front of me that I could have grabbed. And we were one of the first companies building software platforms for businesses in social media, and I was kind of laser focused on customer service, but it turns out there was tons of kind of marketing and other brand use cases that would have allowed us to build a much, much bigger business, much, much faster, and probably had a much, much bigger outcome. And but I'd kind of blinded myself by being too wedded to my original vision. So,
that's interesting. An interesting life lesson is to know that your vision has to evolve. You can't ignore what the marketplace is telling you. And of course, the other thing that people do all the time, and entrepreneurs do this, and small business people, is they say, well, people should want this. And as soon as you use the word should, you're on the wrong track. Right? Because if you said people should want to eat, beef that is not grown on a farm, they should want mine. They should want to care about the rainforest. They should want to believe that there's actual climate change evidence all around them. But they don't. And so for every person you find that understands the the depth and breadth of climate change at this point. There's somebody who says, this is just the planet going through a natural cycle and it'll be over soon.
And that's why we think it's really important not to focus on that, right? And we shouldn't be moralizing people, right? And that's why a big part of our branding, right, isn't trying to say, eat this because it's better for the world. It's just trying to make it fun, right? It is, ultimately, it's like super cool that we could grow real meat without the animal. And that's exciting. And if we can make a really tasty and affordable product at the end of the day, that's enough. You don't need to worry about anything else.
Yeah, and at any point the cost of beef could go up radically too. There's
already is.
Yeah. I mean, it's. I can remember when it was, when I was a kid, how affordable it was. So if there's anything you could tell your younger self, what would you tell 16-year-old Josh or 18-year-old Josh that you wish he knew?
Oh man, it'd be a long list. But ultimately, I think in some ways it wouldn't matter, right? Because would I listen as that younger self? I think that was one of the big lessons that I learned. We didn't go into it, but when I was at university, I had another kind of e-commerce startup that I'd started, and made tons of lessons, and the company ended up failing. And one of the big realizations for me after that business failed was that, I had gone and asked like older and more experienced people, and I'd got a lot of advice, and a lot of that advice had pointed out the mistakes I was making. Every mistake I made, someone had told me I was making, and I didn't listen. And so that was a really important lesson for me on that you do need to like get that advice and actually listen to it. So again, I could go and tell my 16-year-old self that, but I'm not sure they'd listen to me either.
Yeah, but the advice would be, you need to listen.
You need to listen. Yeah.
You're not listening to me now, but just listen to this. I mean, that's a great transition to make, is one, to be able to reflect on the information was actually there and you were ignoring it. There's another level that people do, is like they don't even seek counsel because they know that person's probably going to talk them out of it or change their direction or destroy the magical vision that they have, when actually they're trying to help them to say, maybe you need to make a 15-degree adjustment, or you need to slow down, or maybe you shouldn't raise $20 million, maybe you should raise $2 million. And because people have watched businesses have too much money. And so there's all of this great advice out there. And if you can, as Josh says, everybody, if you can figure out how to triangulate that and separate your ego and your fixation on your vision as brilliant from the outset, instead of something that should always be evolving, I think that's the value of this conversation for all of you, I think, more than anything. And Josh, I really appreciate these insights, and I really appreciate what you're trying to do. You're making a big, bold move, and I wish you tremendous success in this. And I support you completely in it.
Cool. Well, it's worth it, right? It's worth trying.
Yeah, no, I think that your business experience, you had a good business. And I think if you got sucked into making that a bigger and bigger and bigger business, you might not have done this. And I think, you'll look back and say, no, I needed to stop that so I could start this and not waste another 5 years getting wealthier. So, Josh, thank you very much for your time. I look forward to meeting you in person someday and sharing a burger with you.
Absolutely. Anytime.
So thanks, everybody, and for listening. And I hope this was valuable to you, and keep on becoming bolder.